The situation in the Middle East raises the most serious concerns. The unprecedented scale and duration of violence does not stop, but unfortunately only increases. And more countries in the region are drawn into this vicious cycle of violence. The situation in the Middle East is becoming more and more serious, and more countries in the region are drawn into this vicious cycle of violence. Yemen was not an exception, around which another round of escalation unfolds over the past 10 days. It is important to understand its primary reasons, avoiding a one-sided interpretation of the situation, the degradation of which our Western colleagues expose, including today, exclusively to the movement of Ansar Allah. This analysis should not be left out of the wider context, because many points of tension today are provoked by the actions of Israel against the Palestinians, which cause outrage and condemnation on the Arab streets. Mr. Chairman, the launch of the Hussite missile against Israel on the night of December 19th to 20th certainly deserves condemnation. As far as we know, it was intercepted by Israeli air defense even before the Israel border was crossed, but the shrapnel damaged the school. This was followed by several more strikes. Fortunately, there were no casualties. We understand how sensitive such incidents with the launch of the Hussite missile on Israeli territory are for Western Jerusalem. Again, we emphasize the inadmissibility of any actions that pose a threat to the security and civil infrastructure. We sympathize with all the victims, including the result of the strike on Jaffa on December 21st, and wish them speedy recovery. However, following the incident on December 19th, the reaction of the Israeli military, first joined by the U.S. Navy, and then by the entire Anglo-Saxon Coalition in the Red Sea, is clearly disproportionate and also deserves our condemnation. As a result of the massive strikes on the capital of Yemen, Sani, as well as on the port of Mkhodeidah, As-Salif, and Ras Issi, at least 9 people were killed. Fuel tanks, power plants, and sea tugboats were attacked. The port infrastructure was seriously damaged. It is alarming to the circulating media, including Israeli media, that the attack by the Israeli Air Force on the Yemeni ports was planned in advance, and that by the time of the launch of the Hussite missile on December 19th, the Israeli fighters were already in the air. All these circumstances, at least, require careful study. As a result, in recent days, Yemen has been subjected to real air aggression. As a result of the new strikes by Israel, with the support of the U.S. on Sani and the Yemeni ports on the Red Sea, on December 24th, oil terminals, power plants, as well as the international airport Sani, where at that time there was a high-ranking delegation of the World Health Organization, headed by the General Director of the UAE, Tedros Ghebreyesus. He was not miraculously injured, because objects were literally a few meters from the place where the UAE leader was. As a result of the strike on the building of the airport, at least 2 people were killed. One crew member of the delegation was injured, who, by the way, was in Sani for negotiations on the humanitarian situation in Yemen, as well as on the issue of the release of detainees from the UAE. That is, the United States and the United Kingdom, who hypocritically called to do everything for their liberation, in fact, put the negotiators at risk in the UAE, who came to Sani for this very purpose. We urge you to listen to the statement of the UN Secretary-General that the strike on Sani and the ports on the Red Sea create a serious threat to humanitarian operations, while millions of people in Yemen need this humanitarian assistance. It is difficult to characterize the actions of Israel and the Anglo-Saxon Coalition as an attempt to escalate the situation, which led to the victims among the peaceful population of Yemen. Regardless of whether they were violent in response, the scale of the destruction was not measured. By the way, a similar logic can be traced in the context of the Israeli military operation in the Gaza sector, where, as a result of the actions of the Anglo-Saxons, more than 45,000 civilians were killed. At the same time, the Israeli military leadership openly states that it intends to continue its operation in Yemen, aiming to paralyze the activities of the 3 mentioned ports, which remain the most important artery of humanitarian delivery to this country, and where many humanitarian workers work. We urge all parties involved in aggressive actions against Yemen to show restraint and refrain from escalating actions. It is also necessary to take measures to protect ordinary Yemenis and humanitarian workers. Madam President, in January, a year will be completed since the beginning of the illegitimate military actions of a group of Western countries led by the United States of Great Britain against the territory of sovereign Yemen. This self-proclaimed coalition, with the cynical name of the Guardian of Prosperity, does not solve these problems, but only aggravates them and brings to this Middle Eastern country, as before to many others, new and new devastation. Just on Friday, the United States and its satellites again delivered massive strikes on the long-suffering Yemeni land. We urge the members of the Security Council not to mislead themselves. These attacks have nothing in common with the exercise of the right to self-defense under Article 50, one of the UN Charter. They cannot be justified neither by international law, nor by the resolution of the Security Council 2722. The actions of the so-called coalition are a gross violation of Article 2 of the UN Charter. They are nothing more than another military aggression of the collective West against a sovereign state. A state in a long list is like it. It not only does not contribute to the reduction of the degree of tension around Yemen, including turbulence in the Red Sea, but also stimulates further escalation, as well as undermines the progress of the process of inter-Yemeni settlement. Yemeni problems must be solved exclusively by diplomatic methods. We have been trying to convey this simple idea to our colleagues in the Council for a long time, but some of them, unfortunately, still pretend not to hear our calls. Madam Chairman, the situation in Yemen today tends to worsen, which, in the end, can be overshadowed by all the previous, with such difficulty, achievements in settlement. The key to resolving the contradictions in Yemen itself and around it lies in the stimulation of the process of internal settlement. As a first measure, it is necessary to launch the implementation of the corresponding roadmap as soon as possible, almost agreed upon, with the participation of the UN and regional states. We are firmly convinced that the progress on the political track in this country will lead to a reduction, and then to the cessation of military activity from Ansar Allah. In this regard, we urge the Special Envoy to the General Secretary for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, to speed up the necessary steps and to draw up the corresponding agreements. We do not see any grounds for binding Yemeni settlement with regional processes. We also do not see the reason why the Yemeni people should wait until the Middle East, the Great Middle East, will have a common peace before starting to improve the situation in their own country. The inclusive nature of the political process, taking into account the legal interests of all the leading political forces of this country, and the direct dialogue with the involvement of all the protagonists, including Ansar Allah, is an alternative. We repeat, in order to find a stable regional solution and to avoid the recurrence of violence, the key factor of regional stabilization, the rapid cessation of hostilities in Gaza, as well as the search for solutions for long-term settlement in Lebanon and Syria, should not be overlooked. In general, today, dialogue mechanisms, which contribute to the recovery of relations between the countries of the region, which should not ignore the basic problem that destabilizes the entire Middle East, is associated with the non-fulfillment of the UN General Assembly's decision on the creation of a Palestinian state. Then they will find their stable solution in many conflict situations, including ensuring the safe shipping in the Red Sea region, for which Russia is actively advocating. In conclusion, we would like to note the contribution of the outgoing 5 members of the Security Council in his work, and wish the delegations of all kinds of success to the outgoing, and also the upcoming delegations on duty from January 1st. Thank you.
Повторим, при этом для нахождения устойчивого регионального решения и во избежание рецидива вспышек насилия нельзя упускать из виду ключевой фактор стабилизации в региональном масштабе – скорейшее прекращение боевых действий в Газе, а также поиск решений для долгосрочного регулирования в Ливане и Сирии. В целом, сегодня как никогда востребованы диалоговые механизмы, способствующие оздоровлению отношений между странами региона, которые не должны при этом игнорировать базовую проблему, дестабилизирующую весь Ближний Восток, связанную с невыполнением решений Совета Безопасности Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН о создании палестинского государства. Тогда и найдут свое устойчивое решение множество конфликтных ситуаций, включая обеспечение безопасного судоходства в регионе Красного моря, за что Россия активно выступает. В заключение, госпожа председатель, хотели бы отметить вклад уходящей пятерки членов Совета Безопасности в его работу и пожелать уходящим, а также заступающим на вахту с 1 января делегациям всяческих успехов. Благодарю вас.